What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, undefeated, unified, WBC, IBF, welterweight world champion, superstar boxer, Earl of True Spence Jr. talks about the comparisons between him and undefeated, three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered the number one pound-for-pound boxer in the world, superstar boxer Terence Bud Crawford. Errol Spence says when he has a fight already scheduled and he has a fight on date that he's planning for and preparing for, he doesn't like all the talk, the chatter, and the comparisons. He says that he don't like when he gets compared or asked questions about Terence Crawford when he already has a fight on his plate. He says that, for instance, when he ahead of his fight with former two-division world champion, former junior welterweight unified world champion, former WBC welterweight world champion Danny Swift Garcia, he stated that just 2 days before the fight, he said that people was asking him about Terence Crawford. He said, I yet to even get in the ring with Danny Garcia, and they already asking me about Terence Crawford and how it would fare against Terence Crawford and what I think about Terence Crawford, so on and so forth. He stated, but that he said that's not the biggest thing. He said that he understands that comes along with the sport. He said, but when I don't have fights on the table, and all the talk of Terence Crawford, I don't mind the talk of Terence Crawford when I don't have a fight on the table. He said, it just bothers me when I have a fight already scheduled and people are bringing up Terence Crawford. He said, when I don't have a fight in place and I don't have a fight scheduled, he stated that I don't mind all of the talk that comes along with Terence Crawford. He stated because that just comes along with the territory, right? He says, when you make it to this level, and you have two guys that are in the same division, and two guys that are viewed as the best fighters in the world, and they're in the same division. He says you're going to get a lot of comparisons. He said that's just normal. He stated, but I don't like the fact that people throw out these comparisons, and they ask me about him when I have something already on the table. Then he got down to the actual comparison between himself and Terence Crawford. He stated that, when you compare the resumes, he don't believe that Terence Crawford resume compares to his resume. He said, I believe I have the upper hand when it comes to my resume. I have the better resume. I fought the better competition, and I've been doing the heavier lifting. This is not the first time, obviously, Errol Spence has said this. Thus the reason why he stated he feels like he should get a 60-40 split, because the numbers don't lie, and he is the bigger star, and he's fighting the better opposition. You cannot disagree with that. When you go over their resume from top to bottom, yes, Terence Crawford is very accomplished. Terence Crawford fought the guys that was in front of him. He became undisputed, beating Julius Ndongo, beating guys, in the junior welterweight division. He beat Ricky Burns to become a 135-pound champion at 135. And obviously he beat Jeff Horn at 147 to become the welterweight world champion. But when you look at the actual level of competition that he's been facing compared to the level of competition that Errol Spence has been facing, it's truly not close, right? Terence Crawford is even admitted of this, as Terence Crawford stated that he's yet to secure a high-profile legacy, big money fight against a Hall of Famer, right? A rival, he stated. And this is true when you look at his resume, right? Terence Crawford's best opposition on his resume are Yuriokis Gamboa, Kell Brook, and Victor Postal. Those are the top three guys on his resume, right? And one could throw in Jeff Horn. But Jeff Horn was, in my opinion, a one-hit wonder. Jeff Horn got lucky in a decision that was given to him over 8-division legendary iconic superstar boxer who currently the WBA welterweight world champion, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. But most people, like myself, did not feel like Jeff Horn deserved that victory over Manny Pacquiao. But yet, he got the decision. With that said, Terence Crawford moved up from junior welterweight after defeating Julius Ndongo and becoming undisputed at junior welterweight. He then challenged Jeff Horn, and he stopped Jeff Horn. But when you look at it, Jeff Horn is not a big name, and like I stated, Jeff Horn has now since been stopped after that. And Jeff Horn like I stated, he's a one-hit wonder, right? Yuriorkis Gamboa, definitely a good win for Terence Crawford. Victor Postile, to me, is the biggest win for Terence Crawford because Victor Postile was viewed as the boogeyman at 140, and a lot of people said that Danny Garcia, who was the unified champion at the time, and Terence Bud Crawford, who was unified at the time, were avoiding Victor Postile, right? They felt like Victor Postile, was the boogeyman division. Danny Garcia had at the time started creating his own division, fighting at 144 and 145 and things of that nature, and people were stating that Victor Postile, Terence Crawford, and Danny Garcia was avoiding him. And Terence Crawford took on the opportunity, he took on the challenge, and he dominated Victor Postile, as I thought he would, right? Because styles make fights. Victor Postile, in my opinion, his style, is bad for Terence Crawford, or should I say Terence Crawford's style is bad for Victor Postile. And then you had Yuriorkis Gamboa. He came up in weight and challenged Terence Crawford, and Terence Crawford, at times struggled with Yuriorkis Gamboa, but these are the three biggest wins on Terence Crawford's resume. They just don't stack up to two-time welterweight world champion superstar boxer Showtime Sean Porter, who Errol Spence beat to become unified when Sean Porter was the WBC champion. They fought September 28th of 2019. Thus is when Errol Spence, just 12 days later, suffered that horrific car accident, October 10th. But he unified against him. Then he defeated four-division world champion who was undefeated, and I believe at the time was 39-0, Mikey Garcia, Mexican superstar boxer. He defeated him by simply outclassing Mikey Garcia, dominating him every single round. If anything, you could give Mikey Garcia the first round, but not too many rounds after that. With that said, a lot of people say, well, Mikey Garcia was a smaller guy. Well, you can't call for Terence Crawford to fight Errol Spence Jr. and say this is the biggest fight in the sport of boxing, but at the same time saying Mikey Garcia was just too small for Errol Spence Jr. because Mikey Garcia and Terence Crawford simply started in and around the same weight class. Mikey Garcia started at, I believe, at 122, 126. Terence Crawford started at 130, 135. So they both started in lower weight classes. They're not too much difference in size, right? Terence Crawford has a more wiry frame than Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia is about 5'6", 5'7". Terence Crawford is 5'8". Terence Crawford, like I said, has a wiry frame, so he's built different than Mikey Garcia. But if you're calling for Mikey Garcia, if you're going to say Mikey Garcia is too small for Errol Spence, then at the same time, you got to say Terence Crawford is too small for Errol Spence, and now you're building in a built-in excuse should Errol Spence win the fight against Terence Crawford, which is seen as the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. So, Mikey Garcia is a surefire Hall of Famer, hands down, no doubt. And also, he beat the likes of, Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia is a surefire Hall of Famer. He has a Hall of Fame resume, right? He hadn't always won the fights, but he has been in huge fights, and he has won some of the fights. He was underdogs in. He was an underdog against Amir Khan. Amir Khan was still on his reign. He was seen as one of the best fighters in the world. Amir Khan, Danny Garcia knocked him out. Lucas Matisse was the machine who was, the boogeyman, and Danny Garcia was the underdog in that fight, and Danny Garcia won that fight. So Danny Garcia has won some big fights. He's beaten Lamont Peterson. He's won some big fights. He beat Hall of Famer Zab Judah. So he has a Hall of Fame resume. Danny Garcia is a two-division world champion. He was unified as junior welterweight. So Danny Garcia, he's going into the Hall of Fame, right? And not to mention, one guy they have in common, a neutral guy they have in common, a common opponent, and that is former IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer, British superstar boxer, Special K, Kell Brook. Kell Brook is a fighter who is a superstar in the UK. He came over to the States. He beat Sean Porter when Sean Porter was the IBF champion. He took the IBF belt from Sean Porter. And then Errol Spence went to the UK and beat Kell Brook in the UK in a hostile environment, okay? With 70,000 fans there. That was his first opportunity for a world title, was against Kell Brook in the UK in hostile environment, and he stopped Kell Brook, breaking his other orbital bone that Kell Brook had dared to be great 9 months prior when he jumped up from 147 to 160 and challenged then unified middleweight reigning world champion superstar boxer Gennady Triple G Golovkin, who broke his orbital bone and stopped him in the 5th round of their fight. And then 9 months later, he had to defend his IBF strap against mandatory challenger Errol Spence Jr., but this was Errol Spence Jr.'s first opportunity at a world title, and Errol Spence Jr. stopped Kell Brook, breaking his other orbital bone. And the orbital bone that was broken against Gennady Golovkin did not play a part in the fight when Kell Brook fought Errol Spence Jr. His eye didn't swell up. There was no lingering effects from that fight. With that said, it just didn't have an effect on the fight. The fact remains is Errol Spence broke his other orbital bone and his other eye socket. Originally, I was of the mindset that when you break one, the other one is susceptible to being broken, right? So it was expected, in my opinion. But after talking to physicians and surgeons, they stated that if the eye that itself that was originally injured didn't play a part, then the other eye, yes, is susceptible to being broken. But the facts remain is that eye didn't play a major part. They went 10 rounds. Errol Spence stopped him and broke his other orbital bone. So, Errol Spence, then Kell Brook moved up to 154 and cited the reason for him losing to Errol Spence was because he struggled to make 147 pounds. So he started a campaign at junior middleweight, 154. Hadn't had a high-profile fight in 3.5 years. Hadn't made the welterweight limit in 3.5 years at 147. Then he moved down to 147 now recently, November 14th, and challenged Terence Crawford for his WBO title. Terence Crawford stopped him in dramatic fashion in the 4th round of their fight. But Kell Brook, and I'm of the belief, let me say this first, this disclaimer, that I'm of the belief that Terence Crawford at any point in time would have beat Kell Brook, because I just think the styles make fights, and I think the Terence Crawford style is all wrong for Kell Brook. So prior to Kell Brook suffering the eye injuries against Gennady Golovkin or Errol Spence, I think Terence Crawford would have beaten him. So let me just get that out the way now. But Kell Brook simply was not the same guy, right, as he was prior to those fights with Errol Spence and Gennady Golovkin. But nonetheless, Kell Brook Terence Crawford has the victory over him. But that's a common opponent, and Errol Spence also has a victory, and he did it 3 years earlier in a different fashion, right? He went to the UK and beat him in a hostile environment, where Terence Crawford beat him with no fans in attendance, because due to the pandemic, fans are not allowed in every state to attend sporting events. So there was no fans in attendance when Terence Crawford beat Kell Brook. He came down to 147 from 54 after 3.5 years of campaigning at 54. He came to the United States. There's a complete difference. Errol Spence went to the UK. Kell Brook came to the United States for Terence Crawford. Errol Spence fought with 70,000 fans in attendance. Kell Brook fought Terence Crawford with 0 fans in attendance. So there's a complete difference, right? Nonetheless, Kell Brook, I give Terence Crawford credit for beating Kell Brook, but you also got to give Errol Spence even more credit for beating Kell Brook. So, when it comes to that, it's a clear cut winner in this case for Errol Spence. He definitely has the better resume. And if you look at the pay-per-view numbers, he's definitely the biggest star. Pay-per-view numbers don't lie, right? Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. So with that said, Errol Spence first pay-per-view, he did 350,000 pay-per-views against Mikey Garcia. Terence Crawford did 2 pay-per-views. He did one with Amir Khan. That was his last pay-per-view. It did 150,000 pay-per-view buys. And his first pay-per-view was against Victor Postol in unification bout. That did 60,000 pay-per-view buys. With Errol Spence, he did his first pay-per-view buy was 350,000 with Mikey Garcia. His second was 325,000 with Sean Porter. And now his third is reported to be well over 300,000 pay-per-view buys. So it's very clear and abundantly clear who's the pay-per-view star. Not to mention just star status overall. Terence Crawford is a big fish in a small pond in Omaha, Nebraska. And this is no slight to Omaha, Nebraska. I'm just talking about the state size, right? And Errol Spence is a big fish in a bigger pond. Is the biggest state in the United States in Texas. So he sells out Cowboy Stadium with nearly 60,000 fans in attendance. And Terence Crawford is selling out smaller arenas in Omaha, Nebraska. They're both selling out, but Errol Spence is just selling out bigger arenas. So he's just the biggest star in this point. But this is no doubt the biggest fight in the sport of boxing, and I can't wait to see how this all unfolds. But drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC Shouts out to New Media. Shouts out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.